So this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about getting content editors to love Drupal. So how many of you are site builders, I guess? How many of you configure Drupal sites? Is anyone here new to Drupal? Brand new to Drupal? A couple of you? Okay. And does anyone here remember using Drupal for the first time? Like the first time you log in and you see that menu? Does anyone remember that? It's a formative experience in some way. Maybe for you it was Drupal 6 or Drupal 7. So today, anyway, we'll talk a little bit about how to improve that experience, but for content editors specifically. So we'll talk about how to make Drupal a little bit easier to use and how to think about the content editing experience. So just as an introduction, my name is Suzanne Dergacheva. I work at Evolving Web and I do all kinds of Drupal things. So I teach people Drupal, and I also do some project management, some site building, some theming, and occasionally some development. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is Suzanne_Kennedy, so I tweet things sometimes and love to have you connect there. So I work at Evolving Web, and we are a Drupal shop based here in Montreal, and we work for a variety of clients in the government, education, nonprofit, and business sectors. So lots of different types of clients we work with. We have a Drupal 8 training program, so just have to let you know if you want more like professional training on Drupal, come talk to me afterwards and I can give you more information. So today we're talking about content editors. And so I want to kind of put us in the mindset of who content editors are. We sometimes meet these people when we're doing training on a Drupal site, or sometimes we don't meet them at all and we just build our website and we just kind of assume that somebody's going and editing the content and we're not really sure who they are or what their needs are. So let's try and get kind of into the mindset. So often content editors are actually experts at the content side of things. Or sometimes they're administrative people who have a lot of tasks and they're copying and pasting from other sources. Sometimes they could be technical, maybe they could know HTML, and sometimes they won't. And sometimes they're just doing things like translation, or they're just trying to check off a task on their to-do list. So there's really a wide variety of people out there editing Drupal sites. And often people criticize Drupal to say that it's very complicated, that the user interface is maybe not ideal. But the reason for this, of course, like everything with Drupal, is that Drupal is very flexible. So not every website needs the same content editing experience. Not every website has the same content to edit. So out of the box, Drupal just leaves it up to us as site builders to create that experience. And one of the problems is that it often gets left till the end of a project because it's not the highest priority. We want to build a website that looks great and works great. So when we think about, the experience of content editors, that really gets pushed sometimes to the end of the project, and then it falls off the end when other bugs come up and it just never gets done. So today I just want to cover a few things that we can do that are maybe simple and maybe just get forgotten in the process of doing the hundreds of other things we need to do to launch the site. And just to say that these kind of solutions, these tips that I'm giving you, these aren't like one size fits all. The whole part of this that's challenging is that your website is different from other Drupal websites. So your skills as a site builder are knowing the content and knowing the needs of the website and figuring out how these can fit with your particular site. Okay, so to start off with, the overall content editing UI. So you go to your Drupal site, you log in, and you come across this profile page, and okay, so I'm logged into my Drupal site. And what's the first thing that you see? So there's different tools that content editors have for interacting with Drupal. So sometimes they'll have a dashboard. So who here has built a dashboard for content editors before? Anyone? Did anyone use the dashboard module in Drupal 7? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? That first link in the toolbar, did anyone use that? Yeah, sure. I'm sure lots of you have. So there's maybe a dashboard is a useful experience. Navigation. So obviously, one of the main things content editors are going to look for when they log in is that link to create an article or create a course or whatever it is that they're setting up. We have administrative views, so lists of content that they can use for editing. And then, of course, essentially the actual editing pages. So when you click edit on a node, like what do you see? So those are the main kind of interface things that we're probably going to be building for content editors. So to start off with, what is this page? The content overview page. Do we like this? Do we like this page?
Why do you have 1 million records? This page?
Yeah, so this page works great when you have 20 pieces of content on your site, but as soon as you have more, it can be a little overwhelming. It can be hard to find things. Obviously, there are these nice filters. So this is a screenshot, obviously, from Drupal 8. In Drupal 7, you might have used exposed filters to kind of set this up with a custom view, or you might have used views bulk operations to get the little actions there in the widget below the filters. So it is kind of like a nice improved interface in Drupal 8, but it's still not customized for our content, right? This is really generic. Like you could be searching for anything. So one really easy thing to do is to copy that page and customize it. So you have this nice content page that just shows you everything, but if you've got thousands or, you should say a million nodes, like that's going to be maybe hard to find. So one thing you can do really easily is create more customized pages for specific types of content. So if a lot of the content on your website is of one type, maybe there's taxonomy terms there that content editors might want to search for. So we spend all this time optimizing the interface on the front end, like the views, creating views that are usable for our end users, but spending just a little bit of time doing that for our content editors can be a big bonus. So this is just taking that content overview page, cloning it, and taking maybe 5-10 minutes to add in an extra column for one of the taxonomy terms, adding an extra filter, and setting it up as a menu tab underneath the content overview page. So that's an easy thing to do. And of course, you could take these views and combine them and make them into some kind of dashboard. And you could even do that right. You don't have to necessarily make a new page. You could put that right on the user profile page. So you could just take some blocks, throw them on the user profile page, and just help your content editors that way. Just get started with finding the content they need to edit. Okay, so next thing. So maybe we've built some nice dashboard for our users. Next thing that you might come across is that there's all kinds of permissions that we have to give to content editors, and we have to figure out the right combination of permissions to give them enough control to do their job, but not too much so that they're overwhelmed. So many times I've gone and worked with content editors, and I go and I look at what they see on the site, and they have permission to do everything. So the content editors are actually basically super admins in Drupal, which can be maybe a little scary for us as site builders, but also beyond any security problems, it's also just really overwhelming. So if you don't know anything about Drupal and your job is just to post some content on the website, you don't want to be seeing things about view modes. It's going to be a little too much information. So just narrowing down the permissions is, again, like an easy task to do that has a huge payoff. So obviously going in, adding roles, adding permissions, something we all know that we should be spending some time on. So what are those permissions? So that's the tricky part. Like, what are these permissions that content editors should have? So how many of you are running Drupal 8 sites? And you're using configuration management, right? So we all know in Drupal 8, we have content. So content, we're creating things like nodes and blocks, and taxonomy terms, things like that that are added regularly on the site. And then we have a separate component on part of Drupal is configuration. So configuration is stuff that's almost more like programmatic, like the views that you create or the content types that you create. And that stuff in Drupal 8 all gets exported when we try and synchronize configuration across different sites. So it's kind of problematic if you give your content editors permission to change the configuration of the site, because then they're making changes on the live site, and you're probably going to lose track of what they do. They don't know about version control, so they're not going to be like exporting the configuration. So maybe keep that in mind when you're looking at this huge permissions table. So whatever permissions you set up for content editors, they should really be content-related permissions. So things like editing nodes and blocks, editing the actual content of nodes and blocks, and obviously adding new ones. Adding content to the menu, so that's something that's kind of essential for a lot of content editors, depending on how the site is set up. Text formats. So we'll talk a bit more about text formats later, but making sure that your content editors have permission to edit enough of the text formats on the site that they can actually manage the content. Obviously, editing things like taxonomy and media. And yeah, just avoiding giving content editors permission to change configuration. And if you do really like keeping track of the fact that you're doing that. So if you give content editors permission to move blocks around on the site, keep in mind that maybe they'll move blocks around on the site, and you're going to have to manage that somehow. Okay, content types. So this is something we obviously spend lots of time doing as site builders, right? So we're setting up our Drupal site and we're creating lots of content types. And we usually iterate on this. So you might end up with a list of content types that looks something like the screenshot on the left. So just like all of these content types that you've set up in the course of creating the site. And sometimes we give content types really, really great names, like I was working on a website once and there was a content type called entity, which is just a terrible name, doesn't mean anything. I don't think there was a definition in there for what it meant either. You might have blog and article, or you might have like data or diagram. Like, these are not great names for content types because they don't really describe what the content is. So remember, when you're going in and configuring the site and setting up a content type, you're actually creating the user interface for your content authors. So just in giving the content types those names and a description, if you take the time to do that, that's actually building out the experience. So if you look at the screenshot on the right, it's a little bit more user-friendly because we have the definition of each type. And also the list has been whittled down. So if you have a content type you're not using anymore, of course, something you want to get rid of. And you can also limit the types of content each type of user can create, which is going to also make the experience more streamlined for them. And one of the key things here is that when we go to this page add content, like, it's probably not a page that we think about at all because we're used to using Drupal, but it's just like one list, right? Like, it's just a flat list of content. But often in Drupal we have relationships between content types, so it's really important that that's just described somehow for the content editors so they understand what's going on. Because one of the biggest challenges as a content editor is you didn't build the site. You don't know how the content relates together. Okay, so we've got to write good names and descriptions for our content types. And we just like a kind of basic thing, but just making sure that our content types model like actual data types. A lot of times people create content types just because they have different sections of the website, but for content editors, they need to kind of understand what the content type is essentially. So if it's modeling a specific kind of information that they're adding to the site, they're going to understand that. Okay, so we've got content types. Obviously, you've created a bunch, so you probably go back when you're thinking about the content editor experience and try and clean it up a little bit maybe before you launch the site. But another big part of content types, right, is actually configuring the fields. And this is where we're really getting into building out the forms that our content editors are going to be using. So lots of aspects of fields, right? When you're configuring a field in Drupal, I know a lot of the times when people are doing it for the first time, you go in and you add a field and you think, oh yeah, I added the field. And then there's like 2 pages full of settings where we can set up the configuration for the field. And sometimes you just click through as fast as possible. Okay, I want to get this done. I want to create my content type. We're impatient. But there's a lot of good stuff there. So obviously, when you're setting up a field, you can pick what widget the user sees when they're creating the content. And that widget, that's the interface for the content editor, and it's going to impact actually the content that they put in there. So we need to think about that. We also have the opportunity to add help text. So you can think of help text as being like built-in documentation. Like if you put just one line of help text, it can save you maybe 10 people emailing you asking you what this field is for. It could also be useful for your future self if you forget why you added a field. Required fields are great for making content consistent. And sometimes as site builders, we just think like, oh, of course the author is going to add an image because I put an image field, so they'll upload an image. It's going to be great. But if they don't add an image and then the website looks broken, then that's our fault because we didn't make the field required. So making fields required that are required is really important. Default values, if that makes sense. And just having a logical order for the fields too is nice. So actually try and look at the form with that in mind when you think you've got all the fields in place. So just a couple examples here for fields, because there's so many different field types. One example that comes to mind is taxonomy term fields. So who here has worked with big taxonomies before? Like maybe a vocabulary with hundreds of terms in it, maybe even like 50 terms in it. Still can be quite a few. Yeah, so sometimes when we're just first building our site, maybe we have a really tiny test vocabulary, and we've got like in this example, I have 5 terms there. Like I'm setting up this site, I'm lazy, I'm just like, oh, I'll just make 5 terms and then I'll test what that looks like. And so with 5 terms, you can kind of build any interface and it's going to look fine. Like I could use radio buttons, I could use a select box, I could use an autocomplete. And so when the author is actually going in to create the content, like this is what they're going to see, and any of these would work. But as soon as I have more terms, like more than 30 or 40 or 50 terms, it's going to be a problem because what are you going to put? Like 50 radio buttons on the form? Like the form's just going to explode. Like it's not going to look good. Select list also wouldn't work so well for that. And an autocomplete can be problematic if your authors don't know the taxonomy as well as you do. So if they just see an autocomplete, they don't maybe know what to type, or like they're not prompted to see what kind of options or specificity is available. So in this example, there's one example on the right that's a chosen formatter. So it's a field formatter that's added by a module called chosen, and it just provides sort of a combo box, so you can do the select list or you can search. So it combines autocomplete and select. And so maybe if you have enough content in your vocabulary, maybe it's worth putting in a selector like that. So that's a decision you're making as a site builder that's going to have a big impact on the content that gets created and the experience of the authors. Some other things, so just putting in help text, ordering fields, making fields required. These are all important aspects of actually designing your content editing forms. So this is an example where we have some help text added. For the image field there's actually a minimum resolution size that's been added. You know, when you're setting up an image, there's always those options. So those are really useful if your site actually requires that. Otherwise, the content author is going to make the content and then realize afterwards that the images they uploaded were maybe too small. So really simple things we can do. Some other modules that might help you. So I'm not a big fan of like downloading a million modules for your site, but if you have really complex content, then sometimes it's warranted to add some things to improve the content authoring experience. So one of these is field group. So if you have a lot of fields when you're creating a certain content type, and maybe some of them are more important than others, it can be useful to organize those on your page using field group. So it just gives you extra options. So this example here, that we have 2 details boxes to hold some of the fields. The insert module. So how many of you have used insert before? Anyone? Anyone? So what does it look like it does? Let's look at this for a second. Why do we have 2 images here? So one problem sometimes that you'll run into, I see this, like I always think, okay, authors like to embed images in the body text. And sometimes we just want to let them do it. So you know, Drupal 8 comes with this WYSIWYG editor, and there's an image button that comes in the editor, and you can click on it and insert an image. So who here thinks that's a great thing? Yeah, we can insert images into the body text. How many of you think this is terrible? We shouldn't insert images into the body text. How many of you are like, oh?
I think it depends.
It depends, yeah, very wise words there. It definitely depends. And sometimes content authors really want it, right? They're going to be looking for it. Like you just see them, their mouse is like looking. They're looking in the WYSIWYG editor, and they want that button to insert an image. So there's problems with that in terms of content strategy, like having an image mixed in with your text just makes it hard to treat those things consistently. So it's nicer as a site builder to have a separate field for images. But then the content author really wants to put the image in with the text. And often you'll be building a site and there's already content in the site and there's already images with text. So we kind of have to support this. But one of the problems with inserting an image right into the text is that it gives this interface where the user then has to figure out what size the image should be. So it's just kind of arbitrary what size image they've uploaded, how it appears with the text, whether it's floated or not, or it just makes it really hard to make it consistent. And so the insert module, what it does is it allows you to take an image field that's separate and then allows the author to insert that image into the body and include text alongside it. So you kind of get both solutions. You get the separate image, you can treat it separately and use it maybe in a teaser version of the content, and then you also allow the author to do what they want, which is combine the image and text together. And one of the advantages is you can see there's a select box there, and you can pick the size of image that you're inputting. So you actually allow the author to use image styles when they're adding the images. So this is going to improve their user experience because they're going to have an image that's already been scaled down, so they don't have to deal with this massive image in the WYSIWYG editor. Downside is it's maybe not the most intuitive interface. You know, they have to upload the image, and then they have to realize that to put it in the body text, they have to click insert. So there's also some training, some documentation that would be needed for a lot of content editors to use this.
And they have many. Can you have many images? Like, let's say you have
yes.
writing an
Yes.
article and you have
Yes. So the question was, can you add multiple images with this? Yes. So the image field I've created here is just a single value field. But if it was a multi-value field, you would just have an insert button next to each one. So that's also possible. Okay, other things we can do with fields. Sometimes when we're asking our authors to create videos, we just assume that they can go to YouTube and get the embed code and just put that into our field or put that into the body text. But some authors are better at doing that than others. And so using a tool like Video Embed Field, which just lets you embed or it lets you add the URL of the video, is going to be a much better experience for a lot of authors. And it's also going to give you more control because you can decide how big those videos should be. So it's leaving less in the hands of the authors. And there's lots of other field types and field formatters that might be useful. A lot of field types come with custom widgets, so you can kind of consider that when you're designing your content types. So another thing that goes alongside fields for a content type are the other properties that you have. So like usually when you're creating content, you have on the left side all those fields, and then on the right side you've got some settings for the content. And some of these settings are more useful than others. So if you look at the screenshot here on the right, you know, when someone's creating content, they're going to see the revision settings, menu settings, authoring information, promotion options, and some of these things maybe are not useful for every content type. So the more of this you can remove from the interface, the better. One example, the menu settings over on the right. If content should just never go in the menu, then you can just remove those menu settings when you're editing the content type. So little things like that are really going to improve the experience for authors. Also the promotion options, promoted to front page and sticky at top of lists. Who here has encountered confusion about what these checkboxes mean? Confusion, yeah, sometimes I'm confused. I'm like, what does this do? I don't know this site well enough. Like, what does promoted to front page do? Did someone actually use that setting? So these are settings that are sometimes used when creating a view and sometimes not. So they can be really confusing for everyone involved. So nice thing in Drupal 8, right? We can hide those settings. So I don't know if you're familiar with this configuration page, but this is the manage form display page for Drupal 8. So when you're setting up your content type, you're setting up the fields, and then you actually get this whole page for managing how the form looks. And this is where you can change the widget that I was mentioning before. So this is a really important page to come take a look at before you just give the site to your authors. And then one nice thing here is you can just disable stuff. So this gives us access to configure how all the fields are displayed, but also those extra properties. So for example, we can just hide that promoted to front page checkbox if we're not using it anywhere. Like if our blog posts never go on the front page, we just can get rid of that checkbox. So you can, in about 30 seconds, make the form look like this, which is just a little bit easier for maybe content authors to wrap their head around. Okay, some other things. So we talked a little bit about that WYSIWYG editor when I mentioned the insert module, but the whole design of text formats and WYSIWYG editors in Drupal is one of those things that gets often pushed to the end of a project and then just falls off the list of things to do. So WYSIWYG config in Drupal 8. So we all know that there is a WYSIWYG editor in Drupal 8, right? So for those of you who have just installed it, you see out of the box you get this editor. That doesn't mean that the editor that the Drupal gods created for you is perfect for your site and for your editors. So the great thing about the editor is that you can actually configure it. So this, I love this. This is the WYSIWYG editor for your WYSIWYG editor. You get to drag and drop all the buttons that are available into the toolbar. That's this active toolbar. And you can also go the other way. You can also get rid of them. So if you don't think that your authors should have a little button to create a table, you can just take that out of there. And things like paste from Word or paste as plain text, my favorite WYSIWYG buttons of all time, you can add those to the WYSIWYG editor. So this is under the, if you're looking at your Drupal site, it's under configuration, content authoring. That's where you can set up all the different text formats, and the WYSIWYG configuration is there as well. So highly important to look at this. And I think on a lot of projects that I've worked on, we kind of imagine this wonderful WYSIWYG editor that's going to work and that has the right number of buttons, and we think, oh, this is great. And we forget to actually look at the content of the site. So an important thing with a WYSIWYG editor is if there's already thousands of pages of content on your site with all this HTML, your editors might have to actually go back and edit some of that content. So you want to make sure that what's in here matches up a little bit with what they already have, so that they have the tools that they need to make updates. Text formats. So alongside WYSIWYG editors, right, each WYSIWYG editor is just attached to a text format, and different types of editors are going to have access to different formats. And so if you go to this text formats page, this also serves as the order in which those text formats appear. So when you're creating the content and you have the little option for the text format down at the bottom, this is where you can control what order those go in. So if full HTML is at the top of the list here, then full HTML is what's going to be selected if your content editors have permission to use that. So what you really want to keep in mind when you're setting up your text formats and your user roles is that whatever the default text format is, your content editors, like the people editing most of the content on your site, they need to have permission to use that. Because as you're creating content, if that's the default full HTML, then most of the content created on the site is going to be full HTML, because people don't go and change that selection. So you just need to make sure that the people editing the content on the site actually have permission to use the text format that's used most of the time. So maybe you have some use cases where basic HTML is used for user-contributed content, something like that. But you want to make sure that the default makes sense for your content editors. Otherwise, you run into situations where content editors are trying to edit content and they don't have access to the text format, so they can't actually edit the content. And that's the day when the content editor says, I hate Drupal, I just can't edit the text, this is so frustrating. So you want to avoid that at all costs. Okay, so some other things we can do with WYSIWYG editor. So this is a module I kind of hate, but I kind of like everyone wants it, and it's kind of great too, so I don't know how I feel about it. But who here has used the LINKIT module before? Yeah? Has anyone had problems with the LINKIT module? Maybe being it's kind of an overly complicated way of inserting links into your content, but content authors love it because they don't have to go and like copy paths to pages that they want to link to when they're creating content. They just go in and they can create a link, and instead of putting the URL, they see an interface like this where they're actually, they can paste the path if they want to, but they can also just start typing the name of a page, and it's going to add the link for them. So it's a really nice, interface, but it's a little complex to set up because there's all this configuration you have to do just to get links inserted in text. And the other added benefit is that then if paths on your site change, like if you change the URL aliases that you have, LINKIT will manage those paths for you. So you don't have authors who are scrambling because they've put in paths that are then stale. Yeah?
Does this exist for Drupal 8 or Drupal 7?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay, so you would recommend it for a site with a lot of internal links?
I would recommend trying it out, but make sure you test it a lot before you just, don't just take 2 minutes to do this. This isn't one of the 2-minute things. Take some time to test it out and make sure it's working, because it does have logic in there that's like managing all those paths for you. So if it's not configured correctly, or you don't understand what it's doing, it could have, for example, if you have a multilingual site or something like that, any complexity that you have on your site, you just want to make sure that you've kind of taken that into account. So yeah, there's LINKIT profiles that you can set up, and then you're going to be integrating that with the WYSIWYG editor, so there's a new button type that'll be available. And yeah, content editors just love it. Okay, media management. Who here has tried using this module or these modules in Drupal 8? Entity browser, file browser. So this is a feature request that we often get that comes from content editors. So rather than having to re-upload images that they're using again and again, content editors really like being able to just reuse images that already exist on the site. So this tool gives you the ability to just change the interface for adding images or other media. So you can just go in and add a new image or reuse an image. And so it sets up this nice interface. So we think that this interface is really nice, but if you end up with a ton of images and a ton of different authors and maybe a website with thousands of documents, this interface can actually be kind of hard to use also. So it's something that you'll also want to make sure that you test, and not just with a little bit of content, but with a realistic amount of media on the site. And you want to think about also just the different kinds of authors you have, whether all the authors on your site should have permission to see images and media that other authors have added. And so it takes some thinking through. Again, not something that's like a 2-minute task, not something that you want to do the day before you launch your site, but rather something you want to think through in advance and plan out.
How are the resources organized? There's a notion of folders or things that you can say where things go. Because as soon as the volume increases, you need to have some.
Yeah. So there is, for every kind of image field that you have, you can already manage just out of the box in Drupal where that image where the file actually gets stored in the files. So there's a files directory, and you can create subdirectories for different image fields. When you start adding these modules that add support for media, files in Drupal are entities, so those get uploaded to the file system, but they also get stored, as entities in the database, and they're connected to your content. And there's other modules for Drupal that will kind of turn those files into more full-fledged entities that have fields on them and things like that. So there's many ways of, organizing the files. So maybe, like here, these are just like the most basic settings where you can just go in and filter the files and do a search. But if you had more fields on the files, you could search by some kind of metadata. Like if your files had tags associated with them, you could filter by tag. So it really depends on the quantity that you have and how it's going to be used. Like, are people going to be reusing images that have been uploaded recently, or is it going to be more based on the content type or based on the file type, or, it just really depends on that. Like maybe this interface is fine if you've got, it really depends on the quantity of the media, maybe more than anything else. Okay, another thing that we have in Drupal 8 that's kind of nice are previews of what your content is going to look like. So how many of you have tried out using preview in Drupal before? You click that preview button. Maybe some of you were just disabled it in Drupal 7 because it didn't work that well. Kind of showed you how the content was going to look using the admin theme, so less useful. Now in Drupal 8, the preview button gives you kind of a nice preview. So it shows you the front end of the site, and it shows you what the content is going to look like. And this default here shows you what it's going to look like on the page. So like if it's a node and you're doing a preview, it's going to show you the node page. And then there's a little switcher up at the top. So if you have different view modes, you can switch and see what the teaser is going to look like as well. So this is, I think we can all say, a huge improvement. If any of you saw the interface for Drupal 7, this is a whole lot better. But it still might not be ideal. Like if you have different ways of displaying content, maybe not all of that is captured by view mode. So maybe that view mode switcher at the top is going to be confusing. Or maybe what you really need is a way to show the user what the content's going to look like in a view. Find my phone alert. Somebody lost their phone. And now?
But that was it's
It's
the
being
girl
recorded.
from Except.
Okay.
But I don't know how to turn this. Okay. It's like a bomb. Oh wait, there's also a wallet. Maybe you should take the wallet too. If you're actually going to deal with the problem.
All right.
Okay, previews. What's next? I don't even know how much time I have left. Just not too much. Okay. Okay, a couple last quick things. So one other thing that happens in Drupal is, we have content types that you can edit your content. We talked quite a bit about the interface for editing pieces of content, but sometimes you have content that's a bit more complex. So sometimes you have like a landing page or a page with a lot of compound data in it, and it can be really confusing for users because sometimes a page, like to a content editor, just looks like one page. But to us as site builders, we know that it includes some views that aggregate content from other pages, or it displays some blocks. And so what a lot of content editors want is this one edit link on the page that will let them edit everything. And sometimes we can't give that to them because it's just not reasonable. It's a page that aggregates content, and they need to learn how to go to different parts of the site to do that. But sometimes it's reasonable, and we should build it for them because it's going to make their job easier. So some tools that we can use to do this that might be useful. Paragraphs is a module that's become really popular. How many of you have used it or looked at it before? Yeah, so paragraphs is basically just a module that allows you to have sub-content on your page. So instead of just having a set of fields, you have certain fields that can contain fields themselves. So for example, if you have an event, but the event repeats and it has multiple dates and locations, you could create one event content type, and then you could create like event instances within that.
Like
and each
field
one
collection?
can have fields. Sorry?
Like field collection?
Like field collection, exactly. So a lot of you have probably heard of or used field collection, and it's very similar in what it does. And so this is nice because what it does is it puts the edit interface for those components right into the same page where you're editing the content. So you could just click edit once, and then within that page you can edit the paragraphs that are displayed there. One of the downsides of paragraphs is that content that you've created as part of that page, that content just exists as part of that node, and you can't go and reuse it on other pages, or you can't do it too easily. So one alternative approach is to create a reference field. So within your content, you can reference other pieces of content, but you can allow your content editors to edit that content within the page using the inline entity form. So inline entity form just means that when you're editing your piece of content, you can go off and edit the content that's referenced there. So if I'm creating a cookbook, so this form is from the node edit form for a cookbook, a collection of recipes. And so within that interface, I can go off and add new recipes or edit existing recipes. So I can actually edit and add all that content from within this page. Yeah.
How is that different from the standard node reference field?
The difference is that you can actually add and edit the content through the interface for the field. So here, like if you're just using a standard entity reference field where you're referencing other pieces of content, normally you have to go and create that content first, like go and create the recipes first. So here you can actually edit it through the form. And to us as site builders, we might think, oh, well, it's not that much more work to just create the recipes first. But to a content author, that extra step of like going to this other interface to create the content and then create the content that references it, that might make the workflow just too much for them. And so this might actually make the site just seem like 10 times better. So inline entity form, it's got lots of configuration, there's lots of ways to set it up, but it's a good option if you're trying to create this one-click edit. And finally, user testing. So you can take all these bits of advice, all these potential modules you might want to use, but the key to figuring out whether it's actually successful, whether your site is actually going to work for content editors, is to sit down with your content editor, or one or two of them, and try it out. So show them the interface that you've created, and then actually watch them. And this takes some patience. So you've spent all this time building the site. To you, it's really familiar, but actually sitting down and watching somebody go into the site, find the interface for adding content or editing content, and then making some updates, that's really key. So you're probably going to see things that you missed, that you didn't give them, or that you put in an order that didn't make sense. You might realize that your WYSIWYG editor is not complete or not working for them. And so that's going to give you a huge insight. So that's something to do before you launch the site, ideally. So you want to sit down with them, allow them to look at the site. Maybe that's your training with them, your initial training. And then you're going to get some information from that session. You can go back and make a few changes. And that's a really efficient way of making sure that you have met their requirements and that you're not going to have to make tons of emergency fixes the week after so that they can make some updates. So again, yeah, just making sure you do that in advance and really taking the time to watch them. So it's not enough to just sit down and show them how to do things. That's probably what you'll be tempted to do because you created the site and you're like, look, you can do this and you can do that. But you really want to just watch them do a couple things, and that's going to give you a whole lot of insight. Okay, so that's all the content I have. Just one note, I just wanted to let you know I have some Drupal trainings coming up. Toronto, Ottawa, and Atlanta. And if you want training in Montreal, come talk to me. I want to know if there's a demand. You should do it in English or French, so just come and let me know if that's of interest. So are there any questions or comments?
Are the slides again? Are the slides available?
The slides, I'm going to tweet them out. I guess we can't edit the... Oh, I can edit the Drupal Camp website. So I'll try and put them in the description of the session, but I'll also put them up on Twitter.
What's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle is Suzanne_Kennedy. So I'll put that back up. Any questions or ideas? Yes?
Is there any module that you recommend to let content creators to decide by themselves who is going to see the content?
Oh, who's going to see their content?
Yes.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Without
Yeah, so content access is something that's not built into Drupal. Like there's just one permission for accessing published content. So for Drupal 8, there were like lots of modules in Drupal 7. In Drupal 8, the way that I've seen so far is to use the group module, but I'm sure that there are other options. Do people know other options for access control for Drupal 8? Really? So the group module is kind of overkill because it sets up all this functionality for different groups of people and joining groups, but it's nice because you can just go in and say, okay, this content pertains to this group. So it's a fairly complex module, but it will let you do that. But the interface for it is, I haven't looked too much into how granular the permissions are, but I'm pretty sure you can give permissions within a group. So you could say, within this group, these types of users can add new members and can also add new content. Any other questions, ideas? I'm like, I want to go eat lunch. That's my idea. Okay, so feel free to come talk to me later. And I'm also doing a session this afternoon on content strategy. So if you're curious about that, that'll be at 2:30. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.